Hey, folks. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. I see some folks in Europe as well, so it's morning for you folks as well. Um, it's a pleasure to be here, and always nice to talk to folks, primarily in Australia, New Zealand, and that part of the world. As I was mentioning, Maria, it's been a long time since I've been there, and I was mentioning to her as well. I'd love an excuse to come back, maybe late this year, early next. My name's Jeff Gothelf. My background, as I started in tech and design, I was a designer, UX designer, and a product manager, and then a team leader, and then an entrepreneur with a consulting company. And then for the last decade or so, I've been a solopreneur, working primarily with large and mid-sized organizations, teaching them things like product discovery, lean UX, product management, and most recently, organizational agility as well. And most recently, objectives and key results over the last few years. I've been lucky enough to publish a few books. First one, your first record's always your most successful. So the first one was Lean UX. That did really well and really kind of helped me change my career a bit from sort of direct, execution of the work to more teaching and training and consulting and speaking, which I really love. And I wrote that with Josh Seiden. I wrote another book with Josh Seiden called Sense and Respond. And then what was interesting about this conversation we're going to have today is that it feels like over the last 15 years or so of really sort of working with companies to create more customer-centric, more organizations, more cultures of learning and continuous improvement and so forth. I've sort of been backing out in levels. If you think from tactical to the strategic, feels like I've been backing out in levels to the OKR conversation, and arrived there a few years ago. And then just 3 weeks ago, we published Josh and I's third book together, which is it's called Who Does What by How Much, which was an interesting choice of titles, which we can talk about why we did that as well. But it's out now. Hopefully you can get it where you are in the world on Amazon. But it's a book about OKRs and the practical application and scaling of OKRs. And the reason why I think this is really important is if I think about the stuff that I've been teaching, the material that I've been teaching and working with organizations on certainly for the last 15 years, the lean UX product discovery stuff was really tactical. Initially, it was how do you do design in Agile? That was really the question we were setting out to solve. And we've scaled that conversation a bit. And then kind of went out to product management and Sense and Respond, which was a book about how to run a business or how to manage a business that is based on software, which is the overwhelming majority of businesses today. And a lot of companies don't think about that. They don't think of themselves as being in the software business. And what's interesting is that we kept running up against the same obstacles. Like you kept trying to have these conversations and you just kept getting blocked in the same spots. And that spot was goals. Like the sort of the generic umbrella for that conversation was the goals that organizations set. So whatever the target is for the organization, whatever the organization incentivizes and rewards and promotes, that was the thing that people ultimately tended to do or had to do if they wanted to succeed in those organizations. And a lot of the times that conflicted with the ideas of product discovery and continuous learning and improvement and organizational agility. And so the goals conversation became sort of the obvious next step for me, for Josh together. And OKRs really made a lot of sense for us if they were applied in a very specific way. And that's what the book is about. And that's what this conversation is about. And I feel like if we can set the right goals, then, well, not easy, a lot of the blockers to building the kind of customer-focused, continuous learning organizations that we're trying to do go away, or at least become easier to overcome. So that's why I care about this, and I'm sure I'll talk more about it in a minute.
Yeah, sounds good. And just on the book, before we get into OKRs and the system and how do we need to make it all work, we are running a book club, by the way, Jeff. And we meet every quarter. So if there were a couple of copies that you might want to give to our book club, the team prioritizes what they want to read. So that might be an added incentive. So anyway, think about that. Let me know what you want to do.
More than happy to. Absolutely.
Okay, beautiful. All right, so let's get into OKRs and the system and how do we then create greater clarity of that. So what is an OKR then? And I think everyone, generally speaking, looking at who's here, I think everyone knows but I'd rather not assume that. But from your perspective, how would you define, like, what is it? And how does it actually help us do what we need to do?
So yeah, so it's interesting, right? And I think like Agile or Scrum or design thinking or lean startup or whatever, everybody has an opinion on what it is. And I bet that as much as everybody here knows what OKRs are, I bet if we asked the 48 people in this call what an OKR is, we'd probably get 45 different definitions out of that.
Absolutely, I can guarantee that.
Right. And so I'll give you my definition. And here's the thing that always shocks me, I guess, is about this. Every time we talk about it in this way, is that the concept is so simple, right? Like I'm going to share my opinion of what that definition is, what we wrote in the book, in 90 seconds. But the implementation is where this becomes difficult, right? So an OKR OKRs are a goal setting framework for teams that are focused on defining a qualitative customer benefit we'd like to achieve in the world, so an objective, and a quantitative measure of human behavior that tells us whether or not we've actually achieved that qualitative customer benefit. So that's the metric, that's the key result side of things. And it's a goal, and I want to be sure that I was clear about this, right? It's a goal setting framework for teams, right? To achieve that. And again, in neither of those situations is the goal delivering a thing. The goal is to make something better in the world. And we know that it's better when we see people behaving differently. That's it. That's the concept at its most simplest.
And so one of the things that I often get asked about, and the things that I need to dismay in terms of a myth, is, are OKRs the same as KPIs?
So no, in a sense that, and the metaphor that, I didn't invent this, but I like it. And I think we used it in the book ultimately. So KPIs give you a direction to head in, right? We're going west, right? Or we're going north or whatever it is. And OKRs tell us when we've arrived, right? So how far west should we go? How far north should we go? And whether or not we should continue heading west or north or around those things. And so if you think about KPIs, generally speaking, they're going to be high-level measures of the health of the business. So things that you would often find on an executive dashboard, or something that we call in the book, we call them impact metrics, sales, revenue, profit, that type of thing, customer satisfaction. Whereas the OKRs are the actual behaviors that people are doing in our systems that lead to those KPIs, and that tell us that, okay, we've gone far enough in this direction. Now we got to go in this direction to go a different way.
So in what context, because there's a question here from Zach around how do we categorize goals? Is it by process or product? Like, how do we use OKRs? Do we use OKRs to define projects, to define change work? Do we use OKRs to define BAU work? How do we implement OKRs?
Yes, that's my answer. No. So really, that's a really excellent question, because if I saw it in the chat and I didn't really understand it, but the way you asked it was a bit more clear for me. So a couple thoughts. We can absolutely apply objectives and key results to product initiatives, right? We're making a thing and a human consumes that thing at some point, and we want to see that we want to know that we've delivered value to that human when we see them behaving differently, preferably in a more positive and successful way for them, whatever that is. So for product, absolutely. And here's the interesting thing, and this is something that I don't get to talk a lot about yet, but we're going to increase that in the coming weeks and months, is that you can apply the same exact idea to process change or ways of working. Right. So all the organizations that we know and that we work for and that we've worked with in the past, right, they've all implemented Agile. Right. Not a single organization is going to raise their hand and be like, no, we didn't do it. Right. Everybody did it, good or bad or otherwise. Right. The deployment of a process, in my opinion, is an output. Right. We implemented a process, Agile. even OKRs, right? If you want to get really meta about it, right? Why, right? What was the human benefit we were trying to put out into the world, right? We're trying to make our organization more responsive to our customers' needs or something like that, right? How do we know that it worked, right? What are our people doing differently on a day-to-day basis that tells us that we've actually implemented the right process in the right way for the right people, right? What are people doing differently? So you can absolutely apply the same goal setting idea to your methods and to your ways of working. It makes total sense. And I'll just add one more thing to this. You can absolutely apply this as well to any kind of policy change, for example, or culture change inside your organizations as well. Anything from I don't know, I'm trying to think of a good policy, like vacation policy, right? If you think about that, right? Like there's a benefit you're trying to create for the staff of the company. We want people to be more relaxed, happier, more productive. We retain those folks longer, and we believe that a certain type of vacation policy will achieve that. And then we look to see the behaviors of our staff. Are they taking more vacation, less vacation? Are they staying longer? Are they quitting more frequently, or et cetera, right? And so I think you can apply this in a lot of situations. I do want to address one thing that you said, though, in there, because there was a question about BAU, business as usual metrics as well. One of the reasons we use OKRs is to define what is most important to the team, the organization, whatever it is right now, this cycle, the next cycle, et cetera. So that helps us really kind of identify that this is the thing that we're focusing on right now. The business, the business as usual stuff, right? We're going to keep that going in the background, right? So Christina Whitke calls them heartbeat metrics in Radical Focus. And that's a really nice metaphor, right? That's the heartbeat of the organization, right? So we're talking about sort of website uptime, performance, call center, performance, whatever it is, right? The things that keep the organization going. We don't necessarily have to apply OKRs there or to everything, because again, it's going to help us focus on what's most important right now.
Yeah. So I hear you on that one, on a couple of fronts. One, on the policy change. So you talked about vacation policy, also regulatory policy fits into that bucket. How might we respond to an internal or external regulatory change that needs to happen, or compliance? Same thing, just to draw that linkage. And then on the ways of working side, if we've got kind of metrics that are system health metrics, like our quality, our ability to deliver value, like our speed, like our safety, like our happiness, and if that needs to change, then absolutely we can use OKRs for that, just to amplify that even more from what you said. So yes, it's not about agile process or OKRs as a practice. It's more about the change that we're looking to then see in the system that we're operating in, and the customers of that would happen to be the internal people that we've got.
Exactly. We're looking for, and I want to be super clear about language because it matters, right? We're looking for the change in the behavior of the sort of if we're going to use super technical language, right? The actors in the system, right? But those actors need to be human, right? And what's interesting, right, is people ask, why'd you write this book, right? Because we've got Measure What Matters, John Doerr's book. We've got Radical Focus by Christina Whitke, and we've got a few tactical coaching books by Lamort Niven, et cetera, right? All great books, right? But what I think the point that we really wanted to hone in on is this idea that the measure of success has to be human behavior. And if it's not, then what essentially, and Doerr, if you've read Measure What Matters, Doerr is definitely not religious about that. And I hesitate to say that I'm religious about anything or speak in absolutes, but generally speaking, this is one of those kind of one of the two big theses in the book, which is this: it has to be human behavior, because if at any point the key result becomes an output, a feature, or a thing that we make, all we've really done is rebranded our previous goals setting framework and haven't changed anything, right? We're still, and in fact, it's actually kind of worse. We're kind of back to fixed date, fixed scope initiatives. I'll give you a really quick example, then I'll shut up and have you ask the next question. But my favorite example for this, and I see variations on this all the time with the teams that I work with, is they'll say something like, our key result is reduce homepage load time by 90%. That's a metric, right? So it's got a number in it, it's got a percentage in it, it feels aggressive, right? Homepage load time is not a measure of human behavior. It's a measure of system behavior. It's how fast the page loads. And the reality is that you can optimize that forever. You can always make it faster, right? And so what's enough? What's good? Like, we build continuous software systems today, right? These systems never end. At what point do we stop optimizing homepage load time? Well, the real question is, if we change that key result from homepage load time, which is a measure of the system, it's a feature of the system, right? The homepage loads quickly, to reducing bounce rate off the homepage by 90%. Now we're measuring human behavior, right? So when we've reduced bounce rate by 90%, we've optimized homepage load time enough, and we can move on to the next thing. And that's the fundamental difference that we make a very strong case for in the book and in our work.
And so let me just check, Sandy, in the chat, you had asked about BAU as well. Did Jeff answer your question enough? And so the thing that I would just add on the BAU front is that I think often and Jeff, I don't know if you find this as well, but often I find that what we classify as BAU is often confused. We've got sometimes just keep the lights on, which is what you spoke about as the heartbeat metrics. But there is other times where we've actually got change work that is happening, but it's just being done in a BAU way, if that makes sense. But in the change sense, when we're changing human behavior, that's when we need to still be using OKRs. Would you agree with them?
Yes, 100%, right? So I said call center performance as an example, right? But let's say we're trying to improve the performance of our call center reps. Right? We can, and even though like there's a business as usual metric for the call center, we may decide that the most important thing for us in the next cycle, the next quarter, is to really get to create a much more effective call center than we have today. And so we're looking for different behaviors of the reps in the call center, and that would be an OKR. So 100%.
And so, Bree, you've got a question on cybersecurity. Did you want to ask yours?
Yeah, thanks, Marie. Hi, Jeff. So in the context of a platform team or a security or a safety team, cyber, they might be trying to improve the defenses and that type of thing. The customer's a little bit different. Well, is it? What's your thinking around how could a team use OKRs?
Yeah, it's a great question. I thought about this a little bit, and we talk about it a bit. I'm going to tell you a story, and then I'll answer your question. Okay. I was teaching OKRs to a group of telco executives here in Spain, where I live, and one of the folks in the room was in-house counsel, lawyer. And I was teaching OKRs, and I stood up and I said, does this make sense? And she stood up and she said, I don't get it. She goes, I'm a lawyer, and I make cybersecurity policy, right? And how does this apply to me? Who are my customers? And I said, well, and she explained kind of what she does and how. And I said, who consumes your cybersecurity policy? She said, well, who consumes it's going to be third-party vendors for sure. It's going to be cybersecurity suppliers, et cetera. And I said, look, if it's third-party vendors, then I'm your target audience, right? I'm a third-party vendor to this company, and I'm a supplier, and I have to onboard and accept these terms and comply with your cybersecurity policy. And I said, if I do that, what tells you that was a successful policy? And she's like, well, I want to see zero breaches from zero security incidents from third-party vendors, right? Basically. And ideally, I want to see you, I don't want to cause any delay in your procurement onboarding time, which is hell, by the way, in case you've ever done this kind of stuff. And I said, great. those are two measures of human behavior, right? So third-party vendors committing 0 or reducing security breaches by third-party vendors, by 98% or whatever, and at least having a net 0 impact on vendor onboarding time. Okay, that's great, right? Those are measures of human behavior. So we start to think about, right, who are the actors in the system who are consuming these tools, these processes, these policies. Now, that's one side of it. You're talking about bad actors, right? Hackers in this case. And we've talked about this, right? So at some point, the question is, what are we, maybe we are actively, and it's not my field of expertise, right? But maybe we are actively trying to dissuade bad actors from attacking our system. So maybe one goal is to reduce the number of attempts to hack the system. Certainly, we're going to have a goal of reducing the number of successful attempts by bad actors to hack the system. I think that's part of it as well. Maybe like there's a downstream impact to the hacking that's going on, right? So maybe we lose customers because of it, or we get into trouble with regulatory agencies or something along those lines. And so we want to reduce those incidents as well, which are all measures of human behavior. So I think that's the kind of stuff that you're looking for. I don't know how realistic it is to say we're going to reduce the number of attacks attempted by, but I'd like to think that a hacker who continuously bangs their head against the same wall and can't get in is going to try a different wall at some point and see if that wall breaks a bit easier, right? I don't know. That's how I would answer it. I don't know if that was helpful.
No, thanks, Jeff. And certainly I think it's a lot easier when we're putting in guardrails or something to help our teams stay safe. Yeah, a little bit harder when it's the external hacker.
Yeah, but again, it's the thing. It's like, I built the firewall. Cool. Like, did it work? Like, what? Like, how do we know that the firewall worked? Or, forgive me, that's the only cybersecurity thing I can think of off the top of my head, right? How do we, like, is it a good firewall? Is it a bad? Like just because you built it doesn't mean that you delivered any value, right? And so the question is, what are we trying to see? Look, failed hack attempts, that's a measure of human behavior, right? Like, let's measure that. Terrific.
So
awesome.
the next,
thanks,
Bree. Lonnie, your question is next. Did you want to pop yourself off mute? Are you there to ask your question about professional services firms?
Yes, yeah, of course. Thank you. I just need to find where I put it now. Because the chat's been going so fast, I'm like, and I've been listening intently. So let me see. Yes. So I work in professional services, and I've noticed that, when you're in professional services, it's really hard to set something that's meaningful, that's beyond just, billing and utilization. And so I'm just keen to get any advice you have for crafting, OKRs in that services environment. And I did put on here things like, we're always keen to develop new services, new products. And yes, we could track on those, but it might not be across the whole organization. And then obviously something like client satisfaction will be across the whole organization. And so how do you get that, alignment, and what advice do you have when you've got some things that might be not applicable to everyone and some things that absolutely would be?
Applicable to everyone inside the professional services organization?
Yeah.
Got it. Okay, a couple thoughts, because I've been there. I'm even as a company of 1 or 2 people today. I've been in the professional services space as well a few times. Look, let's kind of start at the simplest way to think about it. Obviously, is you make the thing that you make is a service. You provide a service to your client organizations, and if you provided a good service, they buy it, they buy more of it, they come back and buy it repeatedly. They tell other departments inside the client organization that you're a great consulting company, and they should add you too, right? So we're looking for those types of behaviors to tell us that we're delivering something of value. I think where it gets a little tricky is, and I've done this before, I've tried this before, is to try to, especially if you kind of own a particular product or service with your client, is to set OKRs for that thing that you're making for the client. And there's two challenges there that I've come across. One is that you may not have control of the whole thing. And so as soon as your part ends and your client's part begins, you're out of the loop. And so setting yourself up for goals that happen after your part ends is it's out of your control, and you're setting yourself up to fail, I think, in most of those cases, because you can't make any impact once your part fails. I think that's part of it. The other challenge that I've come across in these situations is that, at least in my experience, and I heard this from Eric Ries years ago as well, when he went into GE to try to teach lean startup there, to do fast works to the entire organization, is especially in larger organizations, procurement doesn't work this way. You can't put OKRs on a procurement contract, sadly, in most situations, because most of those organizations are set up to say, okay, you're providing a service. At the end of that service, we will have these things that you make, and we will pay you this much for the thing that you made, rather than you will change human behavior by 50%. Okay, well, what if you change it by 27%, right? They don't like that kind of ambiguity in procurement contracts. And so I think that's a challenge as well when it comes to building OKRs into, it's not a challenge you can't overcome, but I think it's a big one. Inside the organization itself, the products and services that you're making are interesting, because again, the question for me is, who's the customer, right? Who's the consumer of the things that you make? Of the things that, ooh, a bit of an echo there. And I don't, again, I think if you're, like, for example, if you're making a tool for the organization to use, then, and even if it's not the whole organization, then your colleagues and other teams are the customers of that tool or that framework or that system. And then your job is then to measure whether or not they use it again, continue to use it. If they're successful in converting that tool or framework into revenue for the organization, that's interesting. I think it doesn't have to be for the whole company, right? But I think that what's interesting is that if you can prove that you've developed something of value for other parts of the organization, you can use that evidence to try to scale it within the organization. Hey, that team over there has been using my new framework, and they've tripled their utilization rate in the last 3 months. You folks should try it too. There's a lot of answers to your question. I'm hoping I answered it.
You got a thumbs up, I think. Thanks, Lonnie. So there's been a bit of questions in the chat, which we'll get to the specifics of the context of them. But the two things that I wanted to ask you first, Jeff, before we got into the specifics, one was, how would an OKR hierarchy look? And are OKRs nested? Do they cascade? Over what horizon are we thinking about OKRs? Do you have a view on that?
I do, and I will be very transparent with this group, especially this group, because John Smart was a technical reviewer on this book. I'm a big fan of John. He's a friend, and I respect his opinion greatly, particularly on matters of scaling these practices. And this was one of the biggest sort of critiques he gave the draft manuscript that we shared with him, was that we were too light on this exact topic of sort of connecting the organization with these OKRs. And we had a lengthy discussion with him to hear his point of view, and a lot of that material ended up in the book. And so if you know where John stands on this kind of stuff, this won't be a huge surprise. But the short of it is essentially, you have to think of OKRs in a large organization like a family tree. right? There are, and a family tree with no orphans, right? So every goal has a parent goal until you sort of reach the very top of the organization. And you should be able to draw a line, literally, that traces the lineage of an OKR across an organization. And that may become messy because organizations are large and messy, but this idea that there's a connection and a very clear and deliberate and repeatable is not the right word, but a deliberate connection that somebody can articulate, right? To say, we chose this goal. Let's stop talking in the abstract. Let's get hypothetically specific, right? Let's say you work on the authentication team. Okay, your job is authentication. That's your slice of the customer journey that you own. The organization has revenue goals. We talked about KPIs before, right? Revenue, sales, etc. Right? The authentication team should not have a revenue goal, right? You're 4, 5, 6 steps away from authentication, whatever it is that you make, right? So the authentication team is going to set a goal around creating the most efficient or easy to use authentication process in the financial services industry, right? And we know that it's the easiest authentication process because we're reducing password reset requests by 95%. We're reducing calls to the call center about authentication by 90%, and time to transaction, right, which is an interesting metric, right, from the moment a person arrives at the kind of the front door of a system to the moment that they can transact in that system. We want to reduce that by 50%, something along those lines. Those are measures of human behavior. The authentication team should determine those goals. That is their world. Okay, that is what they have control over. That is their sphere of influence. Right? That should not have cascaded down from the top, right? Because they're the experts in that world. What the authentication team does need to do, though, is they need to be able to tell a compelling story that connects that OKR that I just made up 5 seconds ago, right, to the goal of sort of the team that they influence above them. So if you think, let's just think about it's financial services and you're trying to pay a bill, right? And so the authentication team, right, is the authentication goal is a leading indicator for usage of the bill pay functionality, which is a different team, right? And so so people have to authenticate before they can do bill pay, and so that's going to work that way. And then the bill pay team is going to set an OKR for themselves that is then going to be a leading indicator to maybe retention and loyalty, et cetera, which leads to revenue, et cetera, right? So we're going to connect the dots here and be able to tell a story about that family tree, right? This is our goal, but our goal lives here because it influences these folks and these folks and these folks, and then they influence whatever, and then eventually we end up at revenue. So the ideal way that this works and how we describe it in the book is that you do need those top level goals, those KPIs and those strategic objectives and key results. And then what we want is the individual teams to come back and say, here's how we can support those goals. And we meet in the middle and we say, okay, authentication team, why did you pick these goals? Here's our compelling story about why we chose these goals. And then we negotiate, we debate, we decide, right, whether or not that's the right goal or whatever. Maybe it's not the best strategic focus. We want to do something else. But the point is that there's a connection between everything, and the folks that are responsible for specific goals set those goals for themselves.
So Penny, you've got a question that kind of adds a little bit more dimension onto what Jeff described there. And I think you've got a couple of questions in the chat. Did you want to pop yourself off mute to ask the one around the platform team and being able to define goals kind of at the outcomes at a quarterly basis? Are you there, Penny?
Yeah. Sorry, I just had to find the right mouse.
Okay.
Okay. So many questions. So this question, so there is a team. This team was delivering changes to an IDV process. So there's a sort of a culture in the organization that every quarter teams need to have OKRs, and at the end of the quarter, they need to be able to measure their performance for the KR for that quarter. And this team was wholly consumed with delivering, you could say, a feature to get it out the door that quarter. And then, the hypothesis would be that following quarters, they would have compliance around account opening in relationship to the right ID, customer ID being collected. So I suppose they're saying, we would change the behaviour of our frontline staff, that they won't open accounts without the correct ID being retrieved.
Mm-hmm.
The thing is that measure would only come to play, or you'd only start getting results against that measure in subsequent quarters.
Yeah.
And yet they delivered that big feature. What do we do there?
Yeah, that's a great question, and you broke up just a tiny bit, but I think I got 90% of the question. And this is a question that comes up all the time, particularly in large organizations and enterprise and B2B situations, right? It takes us a quarter or 6 months or a year to ship something, and so how do we know it's going to work until we spend that year building it and seeing what happens? And there's a couple of ways to address this. And like Bree, I'm going to tell you a story, and then I'm going to answer your question first. There was a fantastic banking executive. Who's ever said that phrase, right? But there was this brilliant banking executive who we had the privilege of working with as a consultant with a big U.S. bank a few years ago, and she got this stuff. Like she understood this world, and she understood it. And there was a back end team that worked at that organization, and their job was to rehabilitate an aging back end system that was extremely valuable to the bank. Basically, the system, to use the word again, rehabilitated credit card customers who were in default and kind of brought them back into the system. But it was on old technology, and so this team was going to do what they call a lift and shift, right? Take it off the old tech stack and then move it over to the new tech stack. And they came to this executive and they said, this is going to take 2 years, and it's going to cost $20 million. And then we will know if we've delivered value, right? And she was, like I said, she was brilliant, and she got this stuff, and she said, that's amazing. I'm going to give you 6 months and $5 million. Okay. Show me value. Right. And if you can show me value in 6 months and $5 million, I will give you another 6 months and another $5 million. Right? And so on and so forth. Right. So the idea was, she didn't say no. She didn't say, you're not getting 2 years and $20 million. She said, you're getting 6 months and 5, and I want to see value. And what that forces the team to do is to take the work and to slice it down. Right. First of all, we're going to reduce the scope of the work. Number one. Number two, we're going to do the work, the research, to figure out how to start delivering slices of value sooner. Right? How do we get something into the hands of customers sooner in a way that tells us that we're actually on the right path? What parts of the system are not important right now or ever that we need to deal with? And this was a mind-blowing transformation for this team, because they had never thought about their work that way. And so I think putting those kinds of constraints on a team challenges them to think through how quickly they might be able to deliver value. That's number one. That's my story, and there's a lesson there, I think, related to your question. I think the second, the answer that I have is product discovery, right? So sure, sometimes it takes a quarter or half a year or 18 months to build something, particularly at scale and with a certain level of security and performance. Terrific. What can we learn along the way, right? What kind of learning activities can we build into the process to reduce the risk of going down a path that isn't going to be successful when we do finally deploy this thing? And I think that this is where, again, where teams who have never done this before need some guidance and some coaching. Because if you can build learning into, let's say it's 3 months, like you said, to build the thing, right? If you can build learning into every 2-week sprint, then the team is course correcting twice a month. So by the time they ship something at the end of 3 months, it is a lot more likely to succeed. And those learning activities are things that they've probably not done before. Like and they're lightweight, right? So product discovery, talking to customers, building prototypes, running experiments. It's amazing how much that doesn't happen. And it's amazing how valuable it is and how quickly people realize the value of doing that kind of work when they do finally start doing it. And it builds data, evidence. Sometimes it's qualitative data, and that's perfectly okay, right? Into the product development process ahead of shipping the thing. And when you ship the thing, the odds of it actually doing what you wanted it to do in the market are a lot higher. And there's endless examples of this, right? I mean, the Amazon Fire Phone is now a 10-year-old cautionary tale of this very thing, where it was like, no, we have to build it. When we build it, particularly because Bezos wanted it, right? And he was very demanding. And once we ship it, everybody will love it. And they shipped it and everybody hated it, right? And they could have learned a lot sooner whether or not there was value in this thing or how to make this thing more valuable and push this forward. I think that is kind of a large scale lesson about that. But I think it's putting a few constraints on teams and then ultimately challenging them to build learning loops into their process ahead of delivery, right? There's lots of things that you can do well ahead of delivering a thing that can tell you whether or not it's actually worth developing. That gives you a sense of people are going to behave differently. I recently did this with another financial services client. I do a lot of financial services work. And a team that I was working with, same kind of challenge, right? It's going to take us 6 months to build this thing. We won't know if there's value in it until we ship it. And we challenge them to build 2-week long learning loops, talk to their customers, meet with their technical stakeholders, et cetera. And they ended up killing that project before it shipped, which was a massive win. They saved millions of dollars for the organization that were redeployed in a more successful way. So I think these are ways to help reduce the risk prior to launching something, to see if you've actually hit that sort of that end behavior, right? That end key result.
So I think with that, what you've touched on there, Jeff, is kind of two things. One is your myth busting that OKRs aren't relevant, or we shouldn't be thinking about them in a large scale tech program or modernization program. In fact, we should. There's an element there of slicing up the work to get value. And so your example there of the 2 years versus the 6 months, how do we deliver an outcome? But then also, how do we then have KRs or, things where we're learning and de-risking kind of along the way as well, even if that whole feature hasn't been built or shipped yet.
100%.
Yeah. So, okay, fantastic. So that's the first thing.
The slicing down's not, so one question I just follow up on learning opportunities. Would you KR those throughout the quarter?
KR
is
the
that
smaller
how
slices?
you get to create a KR associated with the smaller learning opportunity?
Yes. Yeah, absolutely.
So
right.
for example, if they do a small pilot to a small number of people, maybe you say the key result is, positive feedback, or you somehow quantify that, but positive feedback on the pilot. Or
Yes. Yeah. 100%. The short answer is yes. And I'll tell you a really quick story to illustrate that point. I worked with sort of like the original test prep company in the US for a while before, about 7 or 8 years ago. And they were facing an existential crisis, which was that they had their business model was single big upfront payment for test prep. And Khan Academy came out. And Khan Academy offered the exact same services that they provided for free at a very high quality. That's an existential crisis, right? Also, the Khan Academy is funded by Bill Gates, so they'll never run out of money, which is doubly existential. And so what they try to do is they said, look, we can't get folks to pay $3,000 up front for this test prep thing. Can we build a subscription service? Now you might argue and say, look, they won't know if the subscription service works until they ship the subscription service. And that was their original argument. And we worked together. We said, look, what can we do? What can we learn ahead of time? And we would hack together experiments. First of all, it's customer conversations. Do enough people show interest in a subscription service, which is not an easy sell in that world? Can we drive enough interest from a landing page test? Right? It was just a landing page test that asked people to show interest by adding an email to a list to learn about the subscription service. And we had a threshold for that, a KR, right? X amount of people sign up by date. And we got that. And then we hacked together a service that was literally nothing, nothing new, in the sense that we kind of took existing assets, laid them out in a weekly format, and then tried to convert people from the email list to sign up for the service, which we did at the threshold. And then we had renewal rates at the end of that faked service. And if the renewal rate was above 75% or whatever it was, then we would start to build software. So 100% to your question is yes, right? Every bit of learning along the way has a human behavior associated with it, and a threshold that says, if we cross this threshold, we continue to work down this particular path.
And it just, what then makes me think is, it's actually a paradigm of KRs being a proof point, not a performance measurement point. And I think that might be the problem that I am seeing then. So if we're saying we know we're on the right track because of this, this is what we're getting feedback through, and this is sort of how we know whether we keep going. But actually, if it proves to be untrue, even though the team did the effort, we shouldn't really be telling that team that they haven't performed. So yeah,
no, that's exactly right.
Because I'm seeing us being treated as targets as opposed to them being indicators.
That's exactly right. They're not performance related, right? What happens is, and we've seen this again and again and again, is when you tie performance management criteria to key results, people game the system without fail. The Wells Fargo scandal in 2016 is the messiest and the biggest proof of this. The key result was increase the number of open accounts per customer. Right. So open up more accounts per customer. That was the goal. And they incentivized that with prizes and rewards and raises and promotions. And people opened up bank accounts for their dead relatives, for their dogs, for whatever, so that they could win the prize, basically. And so there has to be a separation from these two. And again, not hitting the threshold is not failure, right? Especially if we reduce the cycle time. Right, the level of investment, right? Not hitting the threshold is not failure, it's learning. It's learning that says we do not need to go in this direction anymore. We've got to change course. And that's agility, right? That's organizational agility. This is the driving, to me, this is like the source of organizational agility, is doing OKRs the right way. Because if the work that we're doing isn't changing customer behavior in the way that we need it to, that we want to, that we've determined is success for us and for our customers, then we've got the evidence, the justification for course correction. And course correction based on evidence is agility. That's it.
So just to be clear, because there's been a little bit of chat in the comments around performance management and OKRs. So to be clear, the answer is not to tie. OKRs are not linked to performance of an individual, not linked to bonuses, remuneration. That's a hard no, right?
No, it can't be. It can't be. And this is why this simple concept, as you peel back the layers of the onion, particularly you get up to this like incentive structure, is really difficult, right? Because we're used to incentivizing delivery, right? Yeah. Did you make a thing? And so if we change the thing to behavior change, did you change behavior? That's a simple sort of thing to do. But the reality is that doesn't actually generate the best work. And so what becomes difficult is then what do you incentivize, right? What should the performance management criteria be? And I will be very transparent again that I am not an expert in this. I have ideas, but I have rarely seen an organization do this particularly well. But for me, it would be things like I want to see some percentage of work, generated from customer problems, some percentage of work having human behavior as its measure of success, some percentage of decisions being made on evidence, being made based on evidence rather than anything else, some measure of closeness to the customer. I don't know exactly what that is, but things along those lines that then translate into better work and ultimately achieving your OKRs.
Maybe we should be incentivizing the behaviors of the individuals that we want to see operating in the system, like pace over perfection, customer obsession. Those are the things I think that you're talking about.
Yeah, and what are the metrics for that, right? So if you're an HR organization trying to build both job descriptions and performance management criteria for that, what are the measures of that? And I don't know, right? It's a tough one. Be a really interesting conversation to have with some HR folks to get to the bottom of this.
I feel like that's a whole nother topic and 1 hour. There is something else in what Daryl has asked that I just wanted to be sure that we covered. So we're not linking OKRs to remuneration. Are OKRs for teams only, or are they for individuals too?
Yeah,
I would have
super
said
clear.
Yeah.
I was just trying to be super clear about this at the beginning. Teams, right? And look, for individual performance inside, like you could set them for yourself in your personal life, right? I absolutely think you can do that. But inside an organization, it's not impossible, but it's extremely difficult to do well, and it's never done well. So don't do it, basically, right? Because again, if your goal is to change here's what ends up happening, right? The OKRs that end up happening at the individual level are things like my objective: become a 10x software engineer in the next year. Okay. And my key results are read 3 books, go to 2 conferences, and take 5 classes. Cool. I did those things. Am I a 10x engineer? Right. We don't know. Maybe not. Right. Maybe you took pottery classes. Like, who knows? Right. And so the question then it becomes is how do I know that I'm a 10x engineer? And those would be things like people ask to work with me, some kind of qualitative score for, like, you're trying to change other people's behavior to indicate that that you've somehow become better at work. And I think that it's just really difficult to do with OKRs, and it's never done well. So I would just avoid it altogether.
So maybe the last and final question with the couple minutes that we have left. And so let me start, and then Chris, I'll turn to you to ask it. So if we could leave someone with some thoughts on maybe how to get started. One of the things that has been posed to me that people do to get comfortable with OKRs is to think about the objective in a 1-year kind of time horizon. And that annual outcome is the same as it would be every quarter in that year. And the thing that then is different on a quarterly perspective is the key results that we're expecting to be able to change. What is your view on doing that, getting started that way? And Chris has got something a little bit similar in his question too. Did you want to answer that one first?
I think this is a solid place to start, right? As long as at the end of every quarter, you're pausing to check in and reflect, right? So what did we learn in the last quarter? What did we achieve? How are we trending towards our key results? What do we need to do next? Does the plan still make sense, right? Have we achieved last quarter's key results? Do we need to move them over to the next quarter, right? So as long as we're pausing every quarter to reflect and make some evidence-based decisions about what to do next, I think that's a great place to start.
Chris, did you want to pop off mute and ask your question to add on to that, if you're there?
Sure. Yeah, my question was about if you look at the amount of effort which is put in OKRs, you often see that setting up the objectives is quite straightforward, and also maintaining them is straightforward. But if you compare the amount of effort spent on key results, setting them up, maintaining them, adjusting them as well on a regular basis, that's a lot of work. So how could you maybe consider the fact that you should focus probably on the objectives more than the key results? And how much could you focus on the objectives, maybe ignoring the key results? What are your thoughts there?
So I agree that objectives usually don't get as much attention, and that they should get more attention. Key results tell us when we're done. You can't ignore them. I don't like to speak in absolutes, but if you remove the key results from the conversation or you remove the numbers from the key results, then how do you know you've done enough, right? Remembering that we're building continuous systems that never end. And so they have to be there. I think when it comes to level of effort, I think the thing that people forget, and it's natural because organizations function this way, is that not in theory, in reality, your OKRs are your best guesses. They're your assumptions based on what you know today about what you think you can and should achieve in the next quarter or year or whatever it is. If we can get that mindset to take root, that this is our assumption, I think people will move more quickly to set goals, because we're going to check in like I said before, like every quarter, for example, we're going to check in and say, okay, 3 months ago, we thought this was a good goal. Is it still a good goal? Right. And if it isn't, we can change it. That's the key. That's the key thing, is that the goals can change based on evidence. And if we can get folks to realize that these are assumptions, that these are our best guesses based on what we know today, then I think the time scale that it takes to commit to these goals is it shortens significantly, because otherwise people are terrified. Crap, I'm signing up for this for a year, for the next year. I better get this right. Right. And I think that that's a fundamental mindset shift that organizations need to go through. And it's rare, to be honest.
Thanks, Jeff.
Yep.
Beautiful. Well, I feel like honestly we could probably have another one of these, Jeff, and still not to get to all the questions. And maybe we should think about doing another one, actually. But thank you for your time today. And thank you everyone for your questions and insights and things to add. And I will suggest the book at the next book club, because I think it might be worthwhile us unpacking a little bit. But thank you again, and I hope everyone took at least one thing away, and some myth busting too, because this is the thing with OKRs. Everyone has their own definition, so at least now we can align around yours. I think that'll work for us.
Amazing. Thank you folks so much for listening, and really great questions and great discussion. If you have any questions at all, I put my email address in the chat. Just feel free to ping me, connect over on LinkedIn, and hope to see you all soon, and maybe in your part of the world sometime in the next few months. That'd be fun.